U ovoj zgradi nizozemskog parlamenta u Den Haagu vrijeme provodi jedan političar čija je stranka zastupljena samo s jednim članom, njime osobno, ali po anketama je u velikom porastu. Već je na drugom mjestu, a navodno ta stranka i dalje raste. Upoznali smo kontroverznog Geerta Wildersa nakon većih kontrola nego u američkim zračnim lukama i zabrane snimanja svih osoba u blizini tog političara koji je pod stalnom, danonoćnom policijskom zaštitom.
Okay, Mr. Wilders, where do you live?
Sorry, where?
Where do you live?
Where I live? Well, I cannot tell you that, unfortunately, because since a few years I have the unfortunate case that I have to live in safe houses because of threats that are against me. So I live somewhere in the country in a safe house that is owned by the Dutch government. And I cannot expose the exact whereabouts of...
So even your best friends have to go through the security and your beautiful secretary or something like that?
Well, there is a lot of security. I cannot tell you the details for obvious reasons, who and when and where. But since, almost 5.5 years now, I lived in army barracks, I lived in prison cells even, and not as a convicted criminal.
So what did you do to deserve that?
Well, I am one of the people that is not afraid to criticize the Islamic ideology. I believe that not only the Islamization of our free Western societies, amongst which the Netherlands is a serious threat, but I also speak out against it. I see the Islam, once again, I have nothing against the people, I have nothing against Muslims, but I see Islam as a totalitarian ideology that wants to rule our whole societies, and at the end of the day wants to submit us all. It's not to be compared with other religions like Christianity or Judaism, but it has to be compared with others, totalitarian ideologies like communism and fascism, because they also, those other...
You put communism first and fascism second. Do you really think that communism is the worst and fascism immediately after, or fascist was worse?
Well, I don't really make a kind of ranking about who is worst. You can differ about that, but they all have in common that those are three ideologies that are totalitarian, that has at the end of the day no room for anything else. Look at any country in the world where Islam is dominant. Look, for instance, at the Middle East. There is no one country where you really see a democracy, where you see a rule of law, where you see a civil society, and where you see that there is room for Christianity or atheism. Try to build a church in Saudi Arabia or
But you can do in Kuwait. In Kuwait is pretty much, you have a Protestant church, Catholic church, they're quite big, and people, foreigners, go there, and I didn't see in Kuwait this kind of pressure.
No, you see it everywhere. Maybe in some countries they allow something. I also visited a church in Iran. I visited Iran many times myself, but those are exceptions if they are already there, if they exist. In those kind of countries where the Islamic culture and the Islamic ideology is dominant, you see violence against the so-called kuffars, the non-Muslims, against homosexuals, against Christians, against women, and there is no room for anything else. Like the Quran, the holy book, also stated, there is no room for anything that is not Muslim or Islam. And we here in Europe face that problem today, not as much as in the Middle East, but we see a growing amount of influx of the Islamic ideology. And
how does it reflect here in Holland? What do you see as the expression of this Islamic ideology?
Well, we see, for instance, not only that the Islamic symbolism is growing, almost having 500 mosques in the Netherlands. 500 mosques in a small country, relatively small country as the Netherlands, Islamic schools. But we also see that, for instance, it's not only the Islamic ideology, it's also the appeasers that rule Europe today.
Čudna je ta priča Geerta Wildersa oko politike i pravde. On je u parlamentu i optužen je zbog onoga što je govorio u parlamentu i što je javno govorio kao političar. Ali izveli su ga pred sud, odmah susjedna zgrada, Ministarstvo pravde, i to državni odvjetnik nije htio podnijeti optužnicu, ali kako je do nje došlo, to je jedinstven slučaj koji postoji samo u Nizozemskoj.
Who is suing you? the state or some individual groups?
Well, that's rather complicated, but to say it shortly, the public prosecutor first decided not to prosecute me. Then we have a provision in our penal code. I believe we are unique in the world that people who complain to the police can appeal in a higher court in Amsterdam against the decision of the public prosecutor not to prosecute me. They did, they won, so the higher court ordered the public prosecutor against their will to prosecute me. But the people who started this, of course, who made all those complaints, who went to the court, were organizations of Moroccans, were also a lot of leftish politicians and so-called intellectuals who often subsidized by our own government, so by the people, used the way of the court to get me to court. And unfortunately, they were successful. So in fact, I'm standing trial in an, I hope, independent court, but it were the multiculturalist and the leftish and the non-indigenous people, groups among them, that made possible that I'm now, as a politician, as an elected politician, in some polls I even represent the largest party in the Netherlands today, I have to stand trial in court. And I believe that if you disagree with a politician, you should debate. I mean, we have the forum here in the Dutch parliament where we're having this interview today, and we are a democracy, we are a pluralistic democracy, so have a tough debate. I like a tough debate in parliament, but to take a politician because his criticism on an ideology, I never insulted people, I have a lot of problem with the ideology, to take them to court is a sign of weakness, a sign of cowardice, a sign of appeasement, and it's only helping, at least that's what they believe.
What did you say? Did you advocate violence? Did you advocate chasing these people out of Holland or Europe? What did you do?
No, of course, I would never do that. I'm a democratic politician, democratically elected, and I believe in the freedom of speech. I believe that we should introduce in Holland some kind of American First Amendment, where you can say almost everything but violence. You can never talk or incite violence. I believe that people who incite violence should be taken to court. This is the red line in the freedom of speech. I never did that, and I will never do that. I never insult people. It's not my aim to insult people, but I must be free to say that Islam is a totalitarian ideology. I have to be free to compare the Islam with other totalitarian ideology. I made a comparison, for instance, between the Quran and Mein Kampf. Winston Churchill, in his book, the World War II, in the 50s, already wrote that down and even got the Nobel Prize for Literature. Oriana Fallaci, a famous Italian writer who sadly passed away 2 years ago, made the same remark. So I'm not the first one, but in this time area where we have an enormous influx of the Islamic ideology in our societies and weak and cowardice and appeasers who are ruling our countries, I have to be taken to court.